Hey guys, you're listening to another episode of Nick Talk, and I'm your host, Nikki James. And today I have a very special guest on my show who I've actually worked with before. His name is Mark Egerton, and he's a paranormal investigator and also an author. And when I was over in England, I had him on my show, so you're gonna hear a little bit of England in this whole segment here. So, Mark, how you doing?
I'm fine, thank you, Nikki. How are you?
I'm doing good. Long time no speak.
Yes, it's a little while, isn't it, since we were here in England?
That's right. Yeah, I loved having you on my show so much over there at Black Cat Radio that I had to have you on my podcast too.
Thank you.
Oh my God, you're so interesting and you're so knowledgeable. First, we're going to talk a little bit about your paranormal investigations because that's really intriguing to people, you know?
Yes, yeah. It's an interesting subject.
It is. So how did you get into it?
Oh, it's quite a long story, Nikki, but basically I had a paranormal experience myself in 1976 when I was 15.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the reason it was so interesting was because it happened in broad daylight on a summer's afternoon. And I actually outline what happened actually in my book, but it sort of led to me going home to my parents and telling them, you know, what I'd experienced, and they were really supportive. They told me not to be so stupid. And my mother had a sister called Marilyn, and Marilyn was married to a guy called Trevor Kenwood.
Okay.
And Trevor, my uncle Trevor, was a member of an organisation called the Ghost Club, which is the oldest cyclical research organisation in the whole world. It's officially dated at 1862, but it actually goes back a little bit further. The roots of it sort of early 1850s. And that was founded in Trinity College in Cambridge, which, as you know, is about 18 miles from St. Neots, where you were working.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, Trevor, my uncle Trevor, his cousin was the chairman of this organisation. His name was Peter Underwood. He's no longer with us. He died in 2014. But Peter was the chairman of the Ghost Club for about 32 years, and he was Trevor's cousin. And so between the two of them, I sort of, my mother spoke to her sister, Marilyn, and said, oh, Mark's had this thing happen. And as it happened, Trevor was visiting us a couple of weeks later, and he sat down and interviewed me and believed my story. And I became fascinated, but I was only 15.
Yeah.
And so he certainly wouldn't allow me to do any paranormal investigating until I was 18. And he would let me do some research for him, though. These are days before the internet, so research involved going to libraries and leafing through books, and it was quite a difficult task.
Yeah.
But I did my first paranormal investigation myself. I'll tell you exactly when. It was the 17th of March 1979. And the reason I can be so precise is because it was an anniversary haunting, one of these that only happens on one particular day of the year.
Oh.
And it happened at a place that still exists called the Ferry Boat Inn, a public house, a pub. And nothing happened, which is pretty much par for the course with a lot of paranormal investigating. People tend to go out thinking that they're going to see loads of ghosts and things, and in reality it's not like that at all. If you experience paranormal activity, it's likely to be of the poltergeist variety, noises and things happening, and you know, a lot of that you can possibly find a logical explanation for.
Right.
So, but it is still interesting because you end up in a lot of very old, ancient buildings. You know, around me, as you all know from living here for a while, we've got places like Buckton Towers and Hinchinbrook House, which are linked to people like Queen Catherine of Aragon. I don't know if you've heard of the famous diarist Samuel Pepys, but he spent a large chunk of his life here in Huntingdonshire. So yeah, we've got a lot of history. So my book is basically a combination of investigating the paranormal with some of that sort of English history. So if people are into kings and queens and things like that, you know, they'll find it interesting. It's not just about hunting for ghosts.
Right. And a lot of people in America are really interested in that too. They all, I think, we don't have castles over here. So, you know, and that's a big part of it. And I know in your book, The Haunted History of Huntingtonshire, you go to some of these places that are linked to royals. And I don't know if you did castles or not. I know there was a couple that you talked about in your book, but
Yeah,
um,
I've been to several castles.
mhm,
The place that's just 2 miles from where I am now is called Buckton Towers,
mhm,
and you would probably describe it as a castle.
mhm,
Uh, it goes back to the 13th century, and Catherine of Aragon, when King Henry VIII was fed up with her and looking for a divorce, but the
mhm,
Pope wouldn't give him a divorce, Catherine was held there for around about 10 months. And then she was moved to another castle nearby called Kimbolton Castle, where she actually died. That's about
hmm.
12 miles from where I'm sitting now.
Wow.
And she is supposed to haunt that castle.
I did not know that. I was actually there at Kimbolton Castle they have a big 4th of July party, don't they?
Yes, they do. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, to be honest, they tend to play down the haunted history because
Mhm.
it's quite a prestigious public school, as you no doubt know.
Okay.
So you've got Arab princes and people that stay at that school paying
Mm.
quite large amounts of money. So they tend to play down any talk of ghosts and things like that.
So what was your experience? Did you go investigate Kimbolton Castle?
No, I didn't because of that reason. They were a bit reluctant for me to go there. But
Um,
I spent the night in Buckton Towers,
mhm.
and also Huntingdonshire is very famous for being the birthplace of Oliver Cromwell.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And he's the guy who basically started the civil war against the king
Right.
of England at the time. It was James I. So um, Cromwell is quite famous, and I did spend a night in the Cromwell Museum, which
Oh,
was actually Huntingdon Grammar School in his day, and
yeah.
both he and Samuel Pepys spent part of their education in that building.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, quite a bit of history. I did notice that a lot of American people do really enjoy it. I started a Facebook page which I called Haunted Histories,
Uh-huh.
and I thought when the book came out that probably 20, 30 people would be interested in it,
Yep.
and there's about 6,000 people following it now. I tend to write a post every week of a haunted castle somewhere in England,
Yeah.
and I write 300 to 600 words, and I tell a bit of the history, and then I tell you the story about the hauntings involved with the place.
Yeah,
And
it
it's
is.
no frills. It's not written as a scary ghost story. It's
Right.
just giving the sort of factual information, really.
Hmm. Yeah, like some of the TV shows these days, they build it up to,
Yes.
kind of keep your interest. But that's one of the reasons why I love following you. Like if there's no active, haunting stuff going on currently in that situation, you'll give a little bit of the history. And I think people really like the history. Like people want knowledge, and it's cool that there is a little bit of this little twist there.
Yeah,
So
I mean, to give you a perfect example of what you just said, obviously Oliver Cromwell is probably Huntingdonshire's most famous son,
mhm.
and I've on Huntingdon Market Square, which you've probably been on, there are 3 buildings there that are allegedly haunted by Oliver Cromwell.
Mhm.
I investigated them for my book, and there is evidence of paranormal activity, but there's nothing that actually definitely determines that it's to do with Oliver Cromwell.
Mm.
One of those buildings is the Cromwell Museum, which I spent the night in.
Mhm.
The other one is Huntingdon Town Hall, and the other one is a very old pub called the Falcon,
Mm.
where he actually has got a big bow window that overlooks the market square, and Cromwell is said to have stood in that window and addressed his troops on the
Yeah.
market square. As I said, all 3 of the buildings have there's evidence of paranormal activity and witnesses who claim that they've had it, but there was nothing actually to determine, beyond doubt that it was to do with Oliver Cromwell.
Right.
And again, I think people say, oh, it's haunted. Who's famous around here? Oliver Cromwell. And and that the story comes that it's a Cromwell haunt. It's
Yeah.
very much like that in England with, you may have heard this name, there was a very famous highwayman called Dick Turpin. Dick Turpin, if you Google that name, basically sort of haunts every pub from London to York, which is a couple of hundred miles. He's a
Okay.
highwayman who used to, a little bit of a Robin Hood character who was said to rob from the rich and give to the poor. But in reality, he was a pretty nasty piece of work. He killed men, women, and children, and anybody who really got in his way. Eventually, the authorities caught up with him, and he's supposed to be buried at York, which is a lovely city. And if you go to his grave in York, and there's a headstone that says it's Dick Turpin's grave, but there is some thought that he's not actually buried in it. They were frightened of the body snatchers in those days because he was such a famous person, and they secretly removed his body and put it in quicklime and got rid of it in that way, and his body's not really there. I'm assured that's true.
Do you believe that people have like a natural gift to see ghosts? Like, do you think some people can and some people can't?
I certainly think it's possible, but the way I approach the paranormal is you're looking for evidence. Now, I have met people who say that they can see spirits all around them, but the fact that I can't, that's not evidential to me. I sometimes get people saying to me, "Oh, you've got a spirit boy standing next to you." Well, I say, "Well, can he tug my trousers, please, or move that on the table?" Because that's not really evidence. And I've met some people who, I genuinely believe they probably can, but it's not what you would call evidential. So it's very difficult. And as I said, seeing ghosts from my own personal experience, which is over 40 years now, I saw one when I was, that first experience I had, and I was 15 then. I haven't seen another.
Really?
I've been in buildings with people who say they have on 2 or 3 occasions, and they're people that I know well and are credible and would have no reason to lie. But I personally have not seen another. So probably that's why I've been doing it so long, because I know what I saw when I was 15 and I want to experience that again.
Yeah. You and I did one. We did an overnight. Where was that? Where were we?
Well, the South O'Bell, the village I live in, there's a public house called the Bell. Well, you know it because you were inside it with us.
And we really, you could you could feel it. But again, we were in the dark, and sometimes it is true. Sometimes your brain does play tricks on you. So you have to kind of figure out, what's reality and what's just fear.
Yes.
Definitely. How do you combat that when you're doing your investigations?
Well, as I said, a lot of people think that these investigations have to be done at night, and I must admit that you tend to get more activity at that time, but I don't really know whether it's the darkness or whether it's the fact that generally people around you are quieter and there's more going on.
Or more perceptive, maybe?
If you're in an old house that's 500-600 years old, then they do creak and groan as they shrink and grow with heat and cold, etc. So sounds and noises really, and unless they're noises that are on demand, you're speaking out, what I call calling out, and you're saying the old adage is 2 knocks for yes, 1 knock for no. Unless you're getting something that's corresponding, communicating with you on demand, it's very difficult to attribute a sound to the paranormal. So you have to adopt a very skeptical mind. This guy, Peter Underwood, who I was talking about, he was my uncle's cousin. Peter was the chairman of the Ghost Club for 30 odd years, and I met him. It was around the early 80s. I spent an afternoon with him. He was a fascinating character. And I said to him, what sort of things should I take with me on an investigation? Electronic toys and things that we see nowadays were not around then. And he said, the most important thing to take with you is people you can trust.
Oh, wow.
He said, because and a notepad and pen, he said, to jot down anything so that you don't remember it. He always told me to research the premises thoroughly before I investigated, which a lot of people say you shouldn't, because the power of suggestion is this: if you're in a darkened room and people say it's haunted by a monk, then people tend to see a monk and things like that. But he said that it is important to research, because if there's something relatively minor which you might dismiss having not researched it, if you actually have researched it, then that could be more meaningful, because of the research that you've done. But he basically said, there are some people around that are just frightened sitting in the dark, so their imagination runs right with them. The small team that you came with me that time, we're quite experienced, so you saw that none of us were frightened or scared, and we were actually wanting things to happen. So
I remember, Mark, I remember when we had I don't know what you call it, so you can tell me, but on the stairs where there was one receiver, and it was basically like like a laser or something, and if you broke that field, it would set off the alarm.
Yes.
What was that? What was that called?
Yeah, they're motion detectors, basically.
Yeah.
To be honest, they are useful. There's a lot of gadgets and gizmos out there now that have been sort of glorified by various paranormal shows that are on TV. I'm a little bit of a skeptic, I'm afraid, because we live in a world now where we've got Wi-Fi everywhere.
Right.
And all these devices have electronic receivers in them.
And in the walls as well.
Yeah. So if you've got an electronic device that's set up to detect ghosts, it's going to pick up radio signals from Wi-Fi, taxi cab radio, anything really. So again, unless I've got something that is responding to my commands, if I say, can you make a noise for me now, please? And you get it, and you get it again, and you're doing that repeatedly for a minute, 2 minutes. I think you can discount a random signal from a taxi cab or a Wi-Fi. We always turn our telephones off, but you can, and the Wi-Fi in the property if it has Wi-Fi, but there could quite easily be a house next door that's got Wi-Fi, and so I'm a bit skeptical of the various gadgets and gizmos. They're quite expensive.
Yeah.
And you'll normally find in the instructions, if you buy any electrical device, it has to specify what it can do. And generally with these pieces of apparatus, you'll find that it will use words like may. It may assist you with a paranormal investigation and things like that. So it's not proven.
Right.
So you have to be skeptical of everything, basically.
Yeah, I do remember when that piece of equipment went off, that when we were there in that room, and I could not get out of that hallway faster. Do you remember that? That was us, right? Was it the hallway? Because I did one with the UK. What was it called? I did a lock-in with the Unknown UK. I can't remember which one, if that was yours or his, but I think it was his. Oh, I remember the one with you and I. Was that the teddy bear that fell on me upstairs?
Yes. We were in the attic, weren't we? And the teddy bear.
Oh my God.
Fell on
And
you.
it wasn't just a regular teddy bear. Mark, tell the listeners how big this is.
It was a huge teddy bear, and it was propped against a wall. And as you sat down, you inadvertently put your backside on its legs, so it naturally tilted forward.
It attacked me.
It must have felt like a person.
It attacked me. Do you remember? I was like, Mark, I can't move. Move. It's got me.
Yeah,
like, turn on the lights. And so when you and your crew are so not afraid, like that, my very first experience was the attack of the teddy bear.
Yeah. Well, when anything happens, the first thing you have to do is look for a logical explanation.
Right. Yeah.
And obviously, the more investigations you do, the more you become aware of logical explanation. I have had a couple of occasions where things have happened which I've thought were definitely paranormal. And then I've actually been able to debunk them and come up with a rational explanation. And one of those actually is in my book, and it was at that premises in the South Hotel.
Yeah.
I can't remember if I told you it related to the bathroom there.
Yeah, I remember.
As you know, it's right on a very busy road. It's the closest I've ever investigated to a really busy main road.
Right.
And although it was late at night and there was very little traffic about, I got some stuff in the bathroom the first time I investigated there, and I was sure that it was paranormal, and I was able to logically debunk it and prove that it wasn't paranormal.
Yeah, and what was it like? It was like car lights, wasn't it?
Yeah, basically car lights were coming along very random, not very often, because it's 2 or 3 in the morning, but they were shining through the bathroom window, and it made the bathroom sort of. I was outside the bathroom, and the bathroom door had 2 glass frosted panes, and the room would sort of glow, which I knew what it was. It was the car lights.
Yeah.
Every so often you would get what looked like a flash of lightning in there, and on one occasion this flash of lightning was blue, electric blue, and I thought, God, what's causing this? I've never seen this before. And what I discovered was if a random car took a slightly different route on the road, there's a bend there, and sort of cut the bend, in other words, drove straight through it instead of round it, then the lights would come through the bathroom window, and they'd hit a chrome radiator and reflect back into the bathroom mirror, which caused this flash. And it was just like lightning flashing inside the bathroom. And of course, the incident with the blue was one of these blue xenon light headlamps in a car.
Right.
But it would only ever happen if a car took an unusual route, direction through the bends, drove through the bends instead of around them. And so, was able to explain it.
Yeah.
But I'd never experienced that before. And when it happened, I was convinced it was something unusual.
Right. Yeah, and I think people do that as well. I've talked to a lot of my friends, and they're like, "Well, I can't see anything, but I know the feeling, And then you talk to some paranormal, or not paranormal, but like some people that are intuitive or psychic, as they claim. They say sometimes the feeling is enough, and but sometimes when you're in a dark alley and you're taking your trash out and it's dark in the back and there's no light, you get the heebie-jeebies.
But that's a similar feeling to you'll get people who watch horror films, and they enjoy being scared and they watch it. And if you're in an environment like that where you are a bit scared, that's a natural feeling. It's fear. So it doesn't necessarily mean that there's something paranormal or not of this world that's causing it. So you have to sort of ignore that, and you can say, oh, there's something there, but that really is not evidence of paranormal activity. Most of the really good paranormal activity that I've experienced has been of the poltergeist variety, where you've had sounds and things, but more importantly, things moving on their own. I've experienced that a few times.
I really wanted to talk about that, actually. You know how there's so many different words for different things. Like there's a ghost, there's an apparition, there's a poltergeist, there's a demon or an energy. Can you kind of help walk us through what the differences are?
Yes, I'm happy to. You generally find that an apparition or a ghost are the same things. Basically, you're talking about a figure that resembles a person. And the thought is that when we leave this world, in every culture in the world, people recognize that we have a spirit, a soul, a life force, call it what you will. And there are some people that believe that dies with our physical body. There are other people that believe that it doesn't, and the spirit lives on. And that is your soul, your life force, your ghost. And some people think that moves across to, let's say, heaven or hell or whatever you want to believe. But some people believe that some spirits, for whatever reason, and it's normally because they've died very suddenly and tragically, a murder, a bullet through the head that they were unaware was coming on a battlefield, or there's something in this world that they love beyond normal. It can be a place or a person, and therefore their spirit doesn't move on, it remains. So that's what you would call an apparition or a ghost. Poltergeist is a German word, and it loosely translated means noisy spirit. And the reason it's a German word is because the first recorded record of it, and I can't remember the date off my head, but it's something like 1200 or maybe even 1100. I have got the date in my book. The first record of it happened in Germany. And this is basically where you get a disturbance and there's no apparition or ghost to see, but you get things either being thrown or moved or noises that are completely unexplainable. As I said, noises are a little bit difficult because properties and strange noises do occur, and this can be caused by changes in temperature with furniture, wood, for instance, expanding or contracting. But when you see things move or you get things thrown at you or thrown, and you can't see anybody as being the cause,
super scary.
It's generally deemed as poltergeist activity.
So do you think poltergeists are like mean?
No, I think poltergeist activity, my theories is that poltergeist activity is generally assumed to be extremely rare. And I think that poltergeist activity is a lot more common than people think. For instance, let's say you leave your car keys on the table, and you know that you leave them on the table. You always leave them on the table every night before you go to bed. And then you come down the next morning and they're not there, and there's no rational explanation. You're the only person in the house. So what's happened? And generally people will think, oh, it's just one of those things, you know, I found them 2 days later, they were in the kitchen or wherever. And so I think a lot of times people experience poltergeist activity and just put it down as, you know, one of the things that happens.
They just ignore it.
When you get extreme poltergeist activity, one we had here in the UK, which is the most famous, is one that happened in London in a place called Enfield, called the Enfield haunting. And you or your listeners may have seen TV programs or certainly heard things about the Enfield haunting, which was pretty extreme. And you know, the police and other people from the outside came in and witnessed it too. And so that one is very famous. But I have witnessed poltergeist activity. I haven't witnessed tables and chairs flying around the room like you see in the movie Poltergeist. I've not witnessed things being pelted at me, which you know, is pretty scary. But I have witnessed things moving. But we have to remember that is not necessarily the work of a ghost or a spirit or an apparition. It could well be us doing it ourselves through something called telekinesis. And, you know, we have the ability to do that and don't even know that we can. Remember the guy called Uri Geller who used to bend spoons and stuff? I don't know if it's somebody you've heard of in the States. He was very famous here in the UK 20, 30 years ago. So we do know that half of our brain, the doctors and scientists don't know what it's for, what it's capable of. So, you know, that is another explanation. So
we don't even use all of our brain.
Yes, you can't say that poltergeist activity is most definitely the work of somebody that's no longer in this world. And it's their spirit or their ghost or whatever you want to call it. There is another possible explanation. So it's still paranormal. And, you know, this is something I should perhaps mention, that the word paranormal, it's not exclusive to ghosts. It's basically anything that science has yet to find a logical explanation for. So things like crop circles, UFOs, ghosts, they all fall under this paranormal umbrella.
Right.
And it's quite fascinating because, people that are very, I mean, in the UK here, Prince Charles has experienced poltergeist activity at
Really?
Sandringham. Now, yeah, they stay at Christmas at a place in Norfolk, which is not too far from
Mm-hmm.
where we are, as you probably know from your time here. And I think if you Google Sandringham House and Prince Charles paranormal, you'll find stuff.
Yeah.
And why would a guy like that sort of make that up?
Right.
He's risking ridicule for a start.
Yeah.
As I said, I'm quite grounded. I don't jump into believing that something's
Just
paranormally
anything.
active. And if I do experience stuff, I'm looking to debunk it. But
Right.
there have been things happen that I can't explain.
So I know people tend to send you photographs or videos and ask like, your opinion.
Yeah.
They ask you to debunk things.
Yes.
Is there ever, or can you recall the most memorable of these events that you were like, wow, I can't debunk it?
To be honest with you, the Society for Paranormal Research, which is based in London, which is the second oldest paranormal organisation after the Ghost Club. The Ghost Club is officially founded in 1862 and the SPR 1882. I went to a meeting there summer of last year, and they actually stood up and said, we're now in a situation where we can no longer accept photographs or video evidence
Hmm.
as evidence of the paranormal. He said, because with CGI and with
Right.
things like Photoshop, people can, make a very realistic um, photograph or movie
Yeah.
that appears to be paranormal. And if you go on YouTube, there's hundreds of them of
Right.
people capture, and you don't know unless you were there whether it's genuine or whether it's faked. And this really harks back to what Peter Underwood told me in the 80s. Always investigate with people you know and trust implicitly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But yeah, I've had a number of, I think the most famous thing that people talk about is something known as an orb. I don't know if you've heard that
I have, yeah.
term before. Yeah, well, here in the UK, orbs started to appear around about 1992. At the time, digital cameras appeared.
Right,
And
when the lens
suddenly,
was round.
suddenly people were getting these images that showed these sort of glowing lights and things.
Mm-hmm.
And it caused a debate that's still ongoing, to be honest. Some people are of the opinion that they've definitely captured an orb or a spirit from the
Yeah.
spirit world. I've seen some that are quite clearly insects. I've seen
Right.
others that are specks of dust or moisture on the lens, or that's what they appear to be. And I've seen others that do look more realistic. There's one in my book. My book contains about 300 photographs, and there's one that was actually taken in the Huntingdon Museum, not by myself, by another paranormal group. Now, this one was interesting because they claimed they could actually see it with the naked eye, and that's what prompted them to take a photograph. And this one is red.
Mm-hmm.
In that building, there is a relatively small room called the Mayor's Parlour. And there's a table, a central table in there with a green base, a very small table, what you'd probably call a coffee table.
Mm-hmm.
And they could see it with their naked eye. And so they captured a photo of it, which is interesting. But yeah, these orbs crop up in photographs and have done since 1992. And, half the people believe that there's something paranormal and half the people believe it's a quirk of the digital photography.
Mm-hmm. What do you
So
think?
I'm not sure, to be honest. I really stand on the fence. I've seen some that I think are pretty incredible, but they could equally be faked in something like using something like Photoshop.
Yeah.
So again, I don't go out to prove to the world that paranormal activity exists. I do it for my own interest, really. If I could find some compelling evidence that you could prove, I'd probably share it just out of interest for the rest of the world. But I don't actively go around. In my book, there's actually an interesting photo that I took at a place called the Ramsey Royal Museum, and that was taken in the dark, not with a camera that was geared for taking night photography, but we had a pretty. It's very rarely scary, but we had an instance there where one of my people, who's very experienced, became quite upset and worried that I wanted to get out, a bit like you did when the teddy bear fell. And as we left, we took a photograph without a flash.
I was attacked.
And this photograph is interesting because it was pitch black, so we couldn't actually see anything. But when you actually look at a photograph of the area with the light on, and then you look at the same area, the photograph that was taken 30 minutes later with the lights off, there appears to be something that looks of a human shape. Now that can be something. I don't know if you've heard of a word called pareidolia.
Yeah, I've heard of that.
Yeah, pareidolia is, when you look up in the sky and you see clouds that look like a horse's head, or you perhaps look at something else and it makes you believe you're seeing something that actually isn't there. I saw one very interesting one which showed a bush and behind it a brick wall, and it looked like a man's head was behind this wall, which sent to me. And when I took it in and I blew it up, it was just the mortar and the bricks, the way they were geared, that they had all the features. And it's a bit like if you, when you sometimes write a sentence and you write letters round the wrong way, or you miss a letter out, you can still read what it's saying, because the human brain is very clever, and it sees things and it recognizes them. So, if I wrote the word need and I put the two letters, capital letters E, the wrong way round, you'd still know that it said need, because your brain would work it out.
Yeah.
So that's something called pareidolia. So that can happen, and I've had people that are convinced they've caught a ghost on film, and they've sent me the photograph, and
that's really interesting. I'm glad you brought that up, because that happens all the time. Like that's kind of the things that people kind of, we just talked earlier about making stuff up in your mind. It's sometimes it's not even purposeful. It's just that, like you said, your brain recognizes something that you've been taught to recognize.
Yeah.
I wanted
so if you look up in the sky and you see a cloud and it resembles a horse's head, you can see that it's a horse's head, because that shape is consistent with that of a horse's head. So it's as simple as that.
And there's so many different things too. Like some people are like, don't dismiss signs. And then some people are like, if you don't dismiss signs, you'll think everything is a sign. So there is a tricky balance there. But I was looking through some of your work, Mark, and there is a light that was coming down, like kind of to your camera, like in a weird shape. And I had done a Halloween ghost hunt with no information and I had no idea what I was doing. I just I saw a ghost when I was little, or what I thought was a ghost. And so I'm kind of like you. I've just been fascinated with it.
Yes.
So we went to, there's a movie, I don't know if you've seen it, it's called Silent Hill.
I've heard of it, yes.
So we actually went to the place. It's in Centralia, Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
And it's an old coal mining town. And what had happened was it caught fire. And so underneath the ground, all this coal is still burning. Like even to this day, it is still burning. And so when you go there, you'll see like smoke coming out of the ground, because there's certain sinkholes and things of that nature.
Yeah.
And in the movie, there was this sound like an alarm for the community, so that they would know, we're under distress, stay in, don't go outside because of, the fumes that were in the air. Well, anyway, we went there and walked through a cemetery and took pictures. And one of your photographs looks exactly like one of my photographs. It's a weird light that I can't explain. And I'm sure a lot of people might have experienced something like this. What do you call that? What do you think that is?
It's very strange. I'm not an expert photographer, but you can get things like something called lens flare,
Mm-hmm.
and you can get all sorts of things that can happen on photographs. And as I said to you, the most common with digital photography is
Mm-hmm.
orbs, and people have got these in sort of family photos, and they assume it's their late grandfather's spirit sort of
Mm-hmm.
behind the child or whatever the photo's on. And you know, I'm not saying that it's not,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm saying that you have to be a little bit wary.
I
And
know. I was thinking the same thing. Like it could have been an issue with lighting, but we were in the dark, like you
yeah,
were,
yeah,
and there was no light around. So I was like,
yeah.
what? It's just a little creepy. Even if it can be explained, it's still like, why is that
Oh yeah, yeah,
light coming directly to my phone?
yeah.
Yeah.
I had a photograph that was sent to me, oh, some time ago,
Mm-hmm.
um, from a guy. Have you heard of the music festival, the famous music festival in the UK called Glastonbury?
Yeah.
Well, this guy visited Glastonbury, and it was the first time that he had been there.
Mm-hmm.
And he was with his brother-in-law, I think, and they sort of basically set up camp and then went to get some food. And he took a few photographs just to take in the atmosphere. And one of the photographs has got a woman in it that appears to be in type period dress, and she just looks out of place. And he swears, and his brother-in-law swears, that this woman was not there to see with the eyes when the photograph was taken. And of course, I got this photograph and I looked at it, and yeah, it looks a strange photo, but you can't. I didn't know this guy. Well, funny enough, purely by chance, he didn't know when he sent the photograph to me, but he's quite local,
Hmm.
and he lives in Huntingdonshire,
Hmm.
and he'd not sent it to me because he knew I was in Huntingdonshire. He'd sent it to me because he'd been on a website and seen my name, and he'd sent it through. I can send you it if you'd like me to.
Yeah,
I've
I'd
got
love
your
it.
email address. I'll email it to you with one or other, one or two other interesting photographs. But I think you've got to be well balanced. You can't necessarily take something as evidence, particularly if it's
Mm-hmm.
come from somebody that you don't
Right.
know to trust.
Mm-hmm.
Because there are some people out there who get quite a thrill. If you go on YouTube, there's lots of um, clips on there of
Yeah.
particularly poltergeist activity happening, which is all done with fishing wire and looks
Yep.
really impressive.
Yeah.
So yeah, you've got to be skeptical.
Right.
And the paranormal is one of those things that unless you actually experience something yourself,
Mm-hmm.
you're never going to be really convinced. I think most of us have probably got a friend that we know that we probably trust with our lives. But if
Right.
they told us something that happened to them that was paranormal, you'd be, well, were you drunk?
Right.
Using drugs?
Yeah.
All those things go through your head because it is one of those things that until you've experienced something yourself, you're
It's
naturally
it's hard to
a little bit,
conceptualize it.
yeah. And I think that's the way to be.
Yeah.
I don't go around trying to say to people, people say, oh, it's a load of rubbish.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, I've seen stuff that, I'm pretty harsh on
Yeah.
looking for an explanation. And I've been doing it a lot of years.
Yeah.
And there are occasions when you can't.
And Mark, you work with some people though that are directly opposite from you. You are kind of like you're hoping because you saw that one thing when you were younger and you're
Yep.
hoping for, a bit more validation, but you're also very like analytical. You debunk a lot of things. And like you said, you haven't seen one since, but some of the members of your crew are, I mean, what I would call like a sensitive or like a, maybe even like you could use the word psychic. And,
Yes.
they can feel things that we can't. And so that's
Yes.
one of the things I like about you is you really kind of cover all grounds, even if you're completely not sold on it,
Yeah.
you know, but it's
Yeah.
hard to. And, what I would tell my kids when like trying new food, you haven't tried it yet. You don't know what it's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
once you eat it, maybe you'll like it.
Yeah.
And I think, a lot of people in the world, because they don't directly experience it, sometimes they close their mind to it and they just think
Yeah.
it's a bunch of hoopla. So I really like that you combined all aspects of, belief, and your crew was really good. I remember when we were there at that house, and I liked the tools that you were using because, like you said, it wasn't an electronic device that could be, modified.
Yeah, I was taught by Peter Underwood and my cousin Trevor, my uncle Trevor Kenwood.
Mm-hmm.
And in those days, you're talking late 70s, 80s, there weren't electronic equipment around. So they tended to use traditional things. And the most traditional method of trying to communicate with paranormal ghost spirits or whatever you want to call them is by dowsing. And you've probably heard of dowsing rods, where people douse for water using these rods, divining rods. Well,
And
you
it
can
works.
also, you can also dowse with things like crystal pendulums. And I think you probably remember Kate, the lady who did the dowsing.
I
Now
loved Kate.
she is a very sensitive lady, and I've seen some remarkable stuff as a result of Kate dowsing with a crystal pendulum. And we'll also use, we don't actually, I mean, most people, it's almost a taboo word to say Ouija board and
That is
things like
exactly
that.
what I was going to ask you next.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I personally don't use a Ouija board, but I do use a glass, just a normal glass. And, we ask the glass to move. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. If it does move and it's moving well, I'll put a card down that says yes and another one opposite that says no. And if that's, we've then got a device to ask a question. It's a question that can only solicit or a yes or a no answer, nothing else. But if it's really working well, we'll put other cards around the alphabet, ABC, and we can get things spelt out then. Of course, that's all well and good, but the next thing to do when the investigation is finished is actually try to do some historical research to see if whatever information we've picked up is accurate and credible. And sometimes it can be very credible. And we had a particular instance, and it's outlined in my book, where we spent the night in the Cromwell Museum, which used to be Huntingdon Grammar School, where Oliver Cromwell himself was educated. And we had a very interesting dowsing session in there, where we picked up a lot of information, but we weren't allowed to go in there alone because there are artifacts in there of huge historical importance to England, because Oliver Cromwell basically is responsible for what we call Parliament now and our government and everything we work. So he's a very famous person. And we picked up a lot of information. And we had the curator of the museum there, a guy called Mike Brooks, was one of the curators. And he said, I'll have to be here with you. We can't leave you in here alone. So he witnessed all this as well, purely independent. I'd not met him until the night. And we got a name, and I asked him whether this name meant anything to him, because the name, we were getting information that there was something in the museum that belonged to this gentleman, and that he knew Cromwell and gave us a lot of information. And Mike Brooks, the curator, said, it's not a name I'm familiar with. So we left, and we thought that we got a load of gobbledygook, basically rubbish. And we left pretty disappointed. And a week later, I received an email from him, and he said that the name, he'd been doing some research, and the name we'd given was one of Cromwell's right-hand generals. In fact, he was Cromwell's right-hand general. And also, there was something in the museum that belonged to him. After the English Civil War, all these sort of people like Cromwell became politicians, and this guy became a political threat to Cromwell. And so Cromwell sacked him, and he did this by mode of a letter, handwritten letter. And a copy of that letter is in the museum, and it's a tiny little thing. It was folded up and tucked away, and this Mike Brooks, he didn't realize that it was there, but one of his colleagues did. And so all the other information that we got was 100% factual, with one exception. We asked, was he married and did he have any children? And he said he did. And when you're dowsing, you can only ask questions that have a yes or a no answer.
Yeah.
So we went through, have you got 3 children? No. Have you got more than 3 children? Yes.
Right.
And he settled on he'd got 12 children, which we thought was pretty remarkable. But
Yeah.
anyway, we left thinking, because he said there was something in there that belonged to him, and the curator said there wasn't, and didn't even recognize his name, we thought it was just a load of rubbish. But the only thing that was inaccurate was we found he had 11 children and not 12.
Oh, wow.
So whether he had a secret illegitimate one or something like that,
Or maybe
I don't
one
know.
that wasn't born completely.
But the reason I liked
Yeah.
that investigation so much was because we had an independent witness there with us,
Mm.
and he witnessed it too. Because it's quite easy to say, oh, it's just a load of rubbish, they're just making that up, and they went and researched the history books and looked all that up. Well, we did, but not until afterwards, because we thought what we'd got initially was just a load of rubbish. So that is probably the most interesting investigation in the book. But in all honesty, Nikki, I would say 50% of the time you get absolutely nothing at all.
Right.
40% of the time you get something, but there is a possible explanation. It's that 10% that makes it so interesting.
Right.
If you watch these paranormal TV shows, if you go on 10% of the time anything happens, it doesn't make great TV.
Yeah,
So
that's true.
I think a lot of it is hyped up and made to look perhaps more scarier than it really is, and so on and so forth.
So in your investigations, have you found that there's a certain type of building that seems to be like more active with paranormal things?
No, you probably find historically that it's buildings that are older, or buildings that are more frequented. Obviously, public houses in England, pubs go back hundreds of years, and there's pubs around. I was one in Salisbury in Wiltshire a few months back, called the Haunch of Venison, that's got an interesting haunted history. I actually featured it on my Facebook haunted histories page, and that goes back to, I think it was 12th, 13th century. And so there are public buildings, so lots and lots of people have gone in and out of them and are associated with that building. And so yes, you do find that, but it can be anywhere. And people say, oh, why do you always get ghosts, and it's always a knight in shining armor or a headless horse, things like that. Actually, most people who actually see apparitions, it's normally an apparition of a loved one who has passed away within a couple of weeks.
Right.
They're not hundreds of years old, all of them. And those hauntings tend to be quite short. And is it the person imagining it because they're so in grief? I don't know. When you speak to some of these people, they give you information that they couldn't possibly have imagined, that they've picked up or received. So it's very interesting. Again, I tend to approach it with an open mind. And again, my only apparition that I've seen was seen in broad daylight. Your normal sort of idea of a ghost is thunder and lightning, middle of the night, midnight, and stuff like that, which wasn't how it was for me.
Yeah, I loved that story that you told about, when you first saw one. And I think a lot of people maybe have those, and then they kind of try to debunk them themselves, like, and try to make, sense of it. And I think that's just normal. But I wanted to ask you about, when you were doing an investigation, when was the most uncomfortable that you've ever been?
I think it was that, in recent years, I mean, I've been doing this for a long time, and I've had some occasions where, I said to you about debunking something. Did you ever go to St. Ives when you were here in England?
I think I did. Yeah, actually, I think I did.
Yes. St. Ives has got a very old historical bridge.
I was just going to say the bridge. Yep.
Yes, with a chapel in it. Well, I investigated that, and I cover this in my book. Oh God, it must have been around about 1980. One of the earliest investigations I did. And one of the stories there is the actual, before, there was a time when there weren't bridges, man wasn't capable of building them. And so people would cross that river by wading through it with themselves and their animals. And of course, most people back then wouldn't know how to swim, and they'd cross the river in the winter when it was in flood. And there was apparently lots and lots of people who'd apparently drowned there. And if you're on the bridge, some people said you'd hear the cries of these lost souls that had drowned, centuries earlier before a bridge even existed. And I spent the night on the bridge. There's a chapel on the actual bridge itself. I don't know if you can remember that. And the chapel is said to be haunted. And at 2 o'clock in the morning, I heard this crying and screaming coming from the water below me. And oh my God, it's true. And I leant over and I was really scared. And it was actually waterfowl, swans and ducks. They were having a fight under the bridge. And because it was night and they were under a bridge, you got an echo. And it did indeed sound like they were real people in the water. So at the time, I was quite scared, I can tell you. But there was a perfectly rational explanation for it. But in recent years, and again, this features in my book, and I've already mentioned it, was the Ramsey Rural Museum. That is a very spooky place. It's a museum that's built in the grounds of a 10th century abbey called Ramsey Abbey.
And
this was
the
where
word abbey is like a church, right?
Yeah. This baby, an abbey was not a church. It's a religious building where nuns, monks, people actually lived.
Oh, okay.
And so it was a religious building, but there would be people living there.
Okay.
And that was the case. It's a bit different to a church in that it's got people living and working inside it. And the Ramsey Abbey has actually got links to my experience when I was a 15-year-old. The building I was in wouldn't have been there when the Abbey was in its full flow, but there was another building there before it that was owned by Ramsey Abbey, and monks would actually walk from Ramsey Abbey to the building Midlow Grange Farm, which is an old 16th century farmhouse. But there was a building there before it. Monks would walk there and they owned a farm there and they would work the land. And what I saw was a monk. Although at 15, I had absolutely no idea of that. So that was one of the things that made me, when I walked out of the room, my friend whose family owned the house said, "What's the matter?" They didn't actually say, "You look as if you've seen a ghost."
Right.
But I explained to him that I'd just seen a monk in this particular room that they called the washroom. And he then told me of the building's, the site's history, and that it had once been owned by Ramsey Abbey, and that he and his family had things happen. And the first thing he said to me was, "Don't tell Chris," which was Christine, his sister, who was 12, and he didn't want to frighten her. So basically there was, but I had no ideas that it had any links with monks or anything like that, which made me sure that what I'd actually witnessed, there was a credible explanation.
Right. Yeah. So, that leads me to another question that I have for you. It's like, you directly, heard a voice, right?
No, I've not. I didn't hear anything from this monk. I just saw it. I've never heard of any voices. I've heard sounds and bangs and things like that. I've actually experienced sometimes something banging at my request in a room that appears to be empty. So unless there's somebody hiding within the wall who's listening in or got something, that's the only. You have to look at every possible logical explanation. Right. but I've never heard voices or anything like that.
Right.
I've only seen one apparition, but I have witnessed things moving by themselves. Illogical inside a building where you can't say it was the wind or
Right. Yeah.
anything like that. Yeah, and
So,
I've had people with me at the time too who've also experienced it. And what you asked me originally, what was the scariest incident that I've had? And I would say in recent years, it would be the Ramsey Rural Museum.
mhm.
Although the incident that I experienced, have you ever been in the Peterborough Museum,
I don't think so. I've
Nikki?
heard about that though, but
Yeah,
I haven't been. No.
yeah. Well, the Peterborough Museum is quite an interesting place. It's a very large English mansion house, which the owner at one stage gave to the city of Peterborough to use for a hospital. And it was a hospital for nearly 70 years. And it now serves as, I mean, Peterborough is the city. It now serves as the city's museum. When it was a hospital, it still has the old operating theatre from the time when it was a hospital, and it's got cellars which were the morgues and that, so it's got a pretty haunted reputation. And we spent the night in there, and to be honest, there wasn't really a lot that happened. And we went to this operating theatre, and I did what you call baseline tests, and you use something called an EMF meter, which measures electronic magnetic fields.
Mm-hmm.
Things like electricity cables produce that naturally, but it's also something that can be relevant when you've got paranormal activity around. Anyway, I did some baseline tests to see if there was any natural EMF present in the room. The room was pretty empty. It had got cabinets around the side of it, a tiled floor, and the actual operating table had been pushed against the wall. So the middle of the room was completely empty, and there were no chairs in the room either. So we planned to spend an hour's vigil in there, and nothing was really happening. And I looked to the right of me where this operating table was, and I thought, that would have been in the middle of the room. In 70 years, there must have been hundreds of operations carried out on that table. And in a lot, there must have been a fair percentage of people who actually would die in the middle of that room. So just out of interest, I took the EMF meter to the center of the room, and I held it at the height what the operating table would be. And I started to pick up EMF readings. I was with 3 other guys, and as I said, I'm a little bit skeptical about EMF meters now because we live in a world where there's Wi-Fi everywhere.
Right.
So I was picking up these readings. They weren't particularly strong, but they weren't there when I checked the room before we started. So I lifted the EMF meter up about a foot, nothing at all. I lowered it down a foot below the height of the table, nothing at all. But when I lifted it up to the height where the table would be, I was again picking up this EMF. So I pointed it out to the 3 guys. What do you make of this? And it was quite strange. Now, because I'm such a skeptic, and there was a possible reason that it could be a Wi-Fi signal, or somebody's got a phone in the pocket, or they've got a text message coming through, or whatever. Even if their phone's turned off or on aeroplane mode, there is a possible explanation. So I decided to try another experiment. I don't know whether we tried it when you were out with me, but you use a small rubber ball, like one of these kiddies bouncy balls, really tiny ball, but very bouncy.
We did,
And
yeah.
I've got one that glows in the dark.
Yep.
So I basically shone a torch at it to energize it, and I put it down in the center of the floor. And because there was no chairs in the room, the 4 of us laid down sort of on our bellies, if you like, with our heads 18 inches, 2 foot away from this ball, and we were gathered around it. And I basically shouted out and said, is there anybody there, any astral beings, in the room with us? if there is, could you show us that you're here and move this ball for us? And a minute went by, nothing happened. And then all of a sudden, this ball moved a full circle, about the size of a human head. And, you know, we all four of us stood there looking at it. There was no, it wasn't as if it was on a slope where it would roll down a slope. It was on a floor and it had gone a complete circle. So that was pretty, one of the guys with me was fairly inexperienced and it really frightened him. He jumped to his feet and put a few F words in. It was quite funny, to be quite honest. Now that would be classed as poltergeist activity.
Yeah.
Now, you cannot 100% say that it was caused by the spirit of somebody that was deceased,
Right.
whose spirit was there in the room and had moved it. We could have moved it telekinetically, like I said to you, using telekinesis, something we can't explain, don't know we've even got the possibility of doing. But it was definitely paranormal because there was no, you know, if you'd have had a magnet in it and inside of it and some powerful electromagnet, you might have been able to replicate it. But all of us, you know, there were people I know and trust, and it was my ball, and there was no logical explanation for that.
Okay, so just to go back a little bit, because I know some people that aren't really like in this field or don't really know much about it, some skeptics, you know, they might hear the word that you just said, which is telekinesis.
Yeah.
Why do you believe in that? Like, is there a study that you've done? I know we talked about it a little bit earlier, where like we're all energy, but why do you believe in that so much?
Well, there's been hundreds of studies done over the years, literally centuries of studies done about people being able to communicate without speaking, telepathy, and people being able to make things move really by looking at it. In hundreds of years ago, 300-400 of years ago, people would have probably classed it as witchcraft. But there is some evidence that people are able to do these things, or people are able to read people's minds. If you go to a fortune teller, they're able to tell you things that that they shouldn't have any way of knowing. I actually went to a fortune teller about 5 years ago, no, longer than that, about 7 years ago, who somebody told me was extremely good. And just out of curiosity, I went to see this lady. And I hadn't had I'm not a person who goes around having their fortunes told. I'm a bit skeptical about it, don't really believe it. I've seen people do it on stage and being able to come up with things, and you find out that they've got people planted in the audience and all sorts of stuff. But anyway, this particular lady lives locally, and I went for a reading with her, and she told me some absolutely amazing things. And not only that, it was recorded. So I left with a CD of what she actually told me, and some of it was really incredible, and I could not explain. She told me things. She reckoned that she'd got my mother with her. She was able to tell me how my mother died, which is not common knowledge. She died in hospital, but she was actually able to tell me what she died of. It's not something that I've gone around promoting.
It's not something she threw out there. Like, was it this? Was it that? She told you what it was.
Yeah, she was able to tell me things. She described my mother. My mother passed away in 2010, so 10 years ago, and she was able to tell. She told me I was writing a book. This was before it was public knowledge that I was writing a book, and she was able to tell me other things that were incredible. So again, I'm very open-minded. As regards these things, I certainly don't consider myself to be gullible. And I went away and I listened to the CD, and I'm thinking, how could she have found that out? Could she have possibly got a copy of the death certificate, my mother's death certificate?
Right.
Because she's told me what she's died of. How would she know this about me?
Yeah.
How would she know that I've had this wrong with me?
Yeah.
And she basically said that she was channeling. One of the things she told me, which was absolutely incredible, she said, I think I've got your mother standing here next to me. And she said, it's a lady. When I describe a lady as below 5'5", I regard them as short. If they're above 5'5", I regard them as tall. This lady is short. She's got short curly hair. She said, but the most distinguishing thing about her, Mark, is her hands. And she held her hands out and she sort of screwed her fingers up like talons. Now, my mother spent most of her life as a typist, and in their later years, last 2 or 3 years before she died, she was crippled with arthritis, and her hands were like that. Now, you know, I don't know how that woman would know that.
Right. Yeah.
So there was quite a few things that were given to me, and I listened to the CD about 3 times over, and every point she made, I'm trying to debunk it.
You're right.
And that was a similar situation with that ball in the Peterborough Museum. It wasn't me imagining it, because 4 other people witnessed it. It wasn't a ball rolling down a slope. There wasn't any logical explanation of it. There was probably about 8 of us in the building. Huge building it is, as you imagine, big enough to be a hospital. So that was totally unexplainable.
Right. Okay, okay. Have you ever investigated a place that you wouldn't revisit?
No. Which brings me on to something when you were telling me, to talk about all these things. The words demon or demonic gets mentioned very often in the paranormal. I've been sort of involved with it. I mean, about 42 years now since I've been doing investigations. I have had breaks when my children were very small. You generally do a paranormal investigation on a Friday or a Saturday night so that you don't have to get up for work early the next day. And when you've got young children, toddlers, 3 or 4, jumping on you in that you've got it in at 4 in the morning and they're jumping on you at 6 o'clock in the morning, it's no fun. So, I didn't completely stop, but I certainly held back and wasn't doing them as often. But in those years, I've never come across anything that was demonic, or I would describe as a demon. I've had 1 or 2 instances where I've encountered something, and the Ramsey Rural Museum, which we spoke of, was one of those occasions where I got something that was unpleasant and not very nice. And I did what I was taught by my uncle and Peter Underwood. I told it, I couldn't see anything, but I said that it wasn't welcome, and we got up and we left. And that's what I was told to do. If ever you get anything that's remotely unpleasant and you don't like it, tell it that it's not welcome. Don't welcome it in. Just get up and leave.
So you think anybody can do that? Like if they feel a bad presence, you think they can just like tell it to go?
Well, I have no scientific reason to say that will definitely work, and I have no reason to say that demons and demonic entities don't exist. All I can tell you is from my experience, I've never encountered them. Now that could be.
And did you feel better after you kind of said that?
Well, yeah, basically you're dealing with something here that people don't understand. So if you get something that doesn't feel right or doesn't feel pleasant, the best thing to do, just as if you was in the jungle and a lion jumped out, you'd run away. And that's effectively, what you're doing. But, it's not a wild animal, or it might not be a wild animal, and it may be able to communicate with you. You don't know. So I was taught to basically tell it wasn't welcome. And these are you hear some of these horror stories associated with Ouija boards and things like that. Half the time, it seems to be people that are playing with something that they know very little about, and they're not experienced. And if they do come across anything that's like that, and I never have, that they may well invite it in and welcome it when they should be doing exactly the opposite. But if they don't know what they're doing, these games are, if you look at, you can buy them on the internet. They're for children from 8 years on upwards.
Oh wow.
Yeah. If you honestly, they really are. I would say that, you know, you don't play with anything unless you understand what you're dealing with, or to some extent, or have experienced people with you who have.
Right.
You know, I wouldn't turn around and say that they are dangerous, or they're not dangerous, because I haven't really played about with them, but I've read some pretty horrific stuff, and of course you get Hollywood and that will make it into a movie, and it becomes
Yeah,
even
exactly.
more scary.
So have you ever had anyone call you to come and like cleanse their home? Like, you know, most people, if they think their house is being haunted, or their space is being haunted, or maybe their person is being taken over by a spirit, you know, which we call like, you know, you have to do an exorcism from that person. Have you ever had people call you to like come cleanse the home or cleanse them?
Well, not cleanse the home or cleanse
Hmm.
them. I've
Hmm.
had plenty of people who've contacted me and said, I think there's something in my house. Will you come and have a look?
Hmm.
And obviously you ask them what's going on, and I'll go and have a look. And I have done that. I'm not religious. I'm not a priest or anything
Hmm.
like that. So I certainly wouldn't try to exercise anything. I
Right.
mean, it's quite interesting, and perhaps some of your listeners may not realize, but the church does have people that do those types of things. It's not something that they go around and advertise, but there are people within the church who specialize in that type of thing.
That's my next question for you, actually. Like, so I'm glad you said you're not religious. Well, I'm not glad you said you're not religious, but that was my question. If you were, because I know the Catholic religion is so heavily involved with hauntings, and that's typically, you know, in Hollywood in the movies, what you see, like it's the father, it's the priest that comes and exercises with
Yeah,
holy water.
yeah.
What's your stance on all of that?
There's I we were talking about Buckton Towers earlier, where Catherine of Aragon was. Right opposite, there's a house there which is supposed to be haunted, which I know an exorcism was carried out. They found the remains of a baby embedded in the walls of the property, and that was removed, and an exorcism was performed there. I covered it briefly in my book, and that was a priest that was brought in. Although if you speak to your average vicar, they'll say, oh, it's a load of nonsense, load of rubbish,
And
and
just
stuff
just for
like that.
Americans, a vicar is a
Yeah, a
priest.
vicar is what would you call a vicar in
So we would call it like a father or a priest or
yes, a
a
father,
pastor. Hmm.
clergyman, pastor.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that the guy who, when you go to church, officiates the service,
Hmm.
religious man. And very often people will go or not very often, but when things do happen in a house, the people will go to their local pastor or clergyman,
Hmm.
and if there is evidence that something is wrong, they will normally refer it to the local bishop, and the local bishop will basically give somebody who's has expertise in the church in these matters, although it's not something that they talk of openly, and very few of them will actually openly admit it.
Yeah.
But I know in this particular case, this did happen, because you know, it's recorded and written, and I
Hmm.
was able to find evidence of it when I was doing my research. I've even got names of people who attended
Oh,
the
wow.
exorcism. It appeared to have worked in this particular instance. There's also a public house in St Neots where an exorcism took place. You know St Neots,
Oh,
Nikki.
yeah.
Do you remember the Halifax Building Society?
Yes.
It used to be a pub, and
Oh,
an
right there.
exorcism took place there in the 1960s.
Wow. Is that like the one that's right across from Boots on the
Yes,
main road?
yes,
Yeah.
almost. Yeah, the Halifax Building. So
Yeah.
if you've still got a copy of my book, if you look
Hmm.
at the picture of the Halifax Building
Hmm.
Society, and you look above the main door that people go in, you'll see the stained glass of where it was the Oak Public House.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So that's. But yes, to answer your question, because I haven't really yet. Well, I have in a roundabout
Okay,
way,
yeah, go
but
ahead.
yes, I have gone to people's houses, and I've taken somebody like Kate with me who is sensitive, and you know, we've picked up on something, and we have tried to communicate sometimes through dowsing. And if we've been successful, the thing that I always do is ask whatever it might be if it's happy here. And if
Hmm.
it says it's not, I ask, would it like me to help them to move them to somewhere better? And
Okay. Yeah.
it's just a case, really, you've probably heard of these stories in the films of move to the light. And we will get something responding to a dowsing session, giving yes or no answers.
Mm-hmm.
And I basically say, if you are you going to do, will you do what I tell you, please? And if they say yes, I say, look around you. Can you see a very bright white light? And if they say
Mm-hmm.
they can, we get a yes. I ask them to walk to it. Sometimes people are frightened, or whatever it is frightened, and other times they will do as I ask, and you'll invariably find that when they actually reach that light, the pendulum or whatever, the glass, whatever we're using as a dowsing medium, will stop. And it's
Hmm.
quite satisfying, because if we are to believe what we're told, and that some people's spirits do stay here for whatever reason, there are some that don't want to be here. They want to be with their families and people who have passed on.
Yeah.
So that's something that we have done. And I have to say, it's quite a nice feeling when that happens, because you think that you helped someone. But if they say that they don't want to move on, I don't do anything. I
Right.
leave them be. Now, there are lots of reasons why people don't want to move on, and the
Mm-hmm.
most being is they're frightened what will happen to them when they
Right.
do cross over. In their earthly life, they've normally done something very bad,
Mm-hmm.
and so they seem to prefer to stay here rather than what awaits them if they cross over.
Right. Yeah,
So
I
that's
think that's
pretty
a
deep
big.
stuff, isn't it?
It's so deep. And, a lot of people, contribute religion with that because a lot of people who are religious or have been brought up
Yeah,
in the church in one way or another believe in heaven or hell. So
yeah,
they believe in some kind of afterlife. I mean,
yeah,
even, looking back to the like Egyptian days, when
yes,
they believed that if your grave was disturbed, you weren't going to be in heaven anymore.
yeah. Tutankhamun's curse and all that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. So there's so many different ways, like so many different beliefs too. And I remember one person told me that was their hypothesis. They were like, maybe we're all right, and we just call like God a different name, and we call a spot a different place. Like
yeah,
so. It's so funny because ghosts, goblins, ghouls, whatever you want to call it,
yeah,
spirits, all these things that we don't know about, um, it really leaves it open to interpretation.
yeah,
So, I think it's really good that you are using your brain to kind of, weed out,
yeah.
what is completely factual and what isn't. And I think it's really interesting to people, especially to people that might have had an experience like you did.
Yeah. Well, as I said to you earlier, we do know for a fact that half of our brain, we don't know what it does or what it's for or what
Hmm.
it's capable of.
Hmm.
And so, um, as I said to you, we were talking about telekinesis and people being able to move things with their brain or something like that.
Hmm.
That's equally as unbelievable as Jesus feeding 5,000 people with loaves and fishes and stuff like
Hmm.
that.
Hmm.
But I'm reasonably I had quite a religious upbringing, and I'm not one to dismiss religion,
Hmm.
and I'm not one to dismiss spiritualism or ghosts or things like that. I keep an open mind, and I've documented what I've seen personally, and I've been at pains to debunk anything or find explanations for things. Certainly, that ball moving, I could find no logical explanation for that happening.
Yeah.
Other things, there's a possibility that it could be this, it could be that, and therefore it's inconclusive.
Yeah, I think that's all this is. It's open to interpretation for yourself. I'll tell you a quick story, Mark. When I was little, my first like kind of ghost story, I was I don't know 9 years old, super little, and I had a friend staying the night, and I remember I had a dream that I put like my little Miss Piggy doll in the closet. And I woke up and my closet was open when I knew I had closed it. So again, like that poltergeist thing you're talking.
Yeah.
And there was a weird mist. And I'm like, what? It literally was like something out of a movie. And then there was this white apparition that came out of my closet. And it said, "I'm the Holy Ghost." And I told my mom this whole story.
Yeah.
And I'm playing it down right now. But in that moment, I was petrified. Like I could not move. I was trying to yell for my friend on, the top bunk, and she was sleeping. And like I just wanted someone to validate that I was seeing this, Anyway, my mom still teases me every year. She goes, "Nikki, tell me your ghost story." Because the funniest thing was, she goes, "What did it look like? Describe it." So when I described it, I said, "Okay, well, it kind of looked like a little kid with a sheet over it and the eyes cut out." And she was like, "Nikki, this is totally your mind, your brain." And I'll tell you what, Mark, like, I don't care if that was my brain. Like, I was like, what if that was the easiest way, like, for me to know I don't know, but
yeah,
I still swear to this day, I don't know if it was my brain or not, or if I was in a dream state, but that was the most realistic thing. And so, yeah, I get teased about it constantly.
This is why the example that I gave you at the Peterborough Museum with the ball moving, and the example in the Cromwell Museum with the curator present are so much more credible because other people witnessed it too.
Yes.
My experience when I was 15 happened in broad daylight, and I know what I saw.
Right.
And I only saw it for 3 to 5 seconds, no longer. But nobody else saw it to separate reality from imagination.
Well, I'll tell you what, you know so much more about history. Like you said, like you didn't even put the stuff in your book. So I want to have you on again, and we can do some really fun talks about history. I'm going to ask some people on my social media, like what questions they might have that maybe you have the answer to, maybe you don't. But I think you're the best guy to have on just because you're so good at this and you've done so much research.
Yeah, I'll send you the links and that, Nikki, if that's easier.
Awesome.
No, it's not always easy on the radio, but it's easier to send you the links rather than try and tell people over the air.
All right, perfect. Well, we'll make sure we get all of that out to everybody. You guys, thank you so much. Have a happy holiday. Be safe. And that is it for us.